The golden light of early morning slipped through the sheer curtains of a small apartment, tucked into the quieter side of the city. The space was modest, yet every corner reflected the woman who lived there. Emma Collins, a 28-year-old graphic designer who carried both dreams and fatigue in equal measure. Her desk, littered with sketchbooks, coffee mugs, and half-burnt candles, spoke of sleepless nights and untamed ambition. For years she had worked tirelessly as a freelancer, hoping to one day own her own design firm, yet lately her body had begun to betray her. The once endless energy she prided herself on seemed to drain faster than she could refill it. Even her passion for design felt clouded by exhaustion and nausea that came and went without warning. That morning, Emma sat quietly on the edge of her bed, her reflection staring back at her from a cracked mirror. Her long chestnut hair was tied in a loose bun, and the dark circles under her brown eyes told stories of both dedication and worry. She wasn't one to complain, but the recent weeks had scared her. She had fainted once during a client presentation, and twice had woken up too dizzy to even stand. Her friend Lila had begged her to get a checkup, but Emma had kept putting it off, until now. The city outside her window was already alive with the hum of traffic and distant chatter. She dressed neatly in a white blouse and faded jeans, then slipped into her worn sneakers. There was a time she would have put effort into looking perfect before stepping out, but that morning all she wanted was answers. Slinging her sketch pad and purse over her shoulder, she took the bus to the Riverside Medical Center, a modern building known for serving everyone from construction workers to corporate executives. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. The reception was a picture of organized chaos. Nurses moved briskly between patients, phones rang endlessly, and the waiting area was filled with tired faces. Emma took a form from the counter, filled it out carefully, and took a seat by the window. The nurse barely looked up when she called. "Miss Collins, room 124, please." As she waited, her mind drifted to her family, her younger brother in college, her widowed mother who worked 2 jobs to help pay off old debts. Emma had promised herself she'd take care of them one day. Maybe that was why she never slowed down. The thought of failing them terrified her more than anything. She didn't know that the path she was on, so steady and predictable until now, was about to shatter and rebuild her in ways she couldn't imagine. Across the city, in a high-rise overlooking the harbor, Alexander Grant adjusted his cufflinks in front of a full-length mirror. 36 years old, founder of a multi-million-dollar investment firm, and the face of countless financial magazines, he was a man most people admired from a distance. His reputation was that of brilliance wrapped in ice. To his board members, he was the man who never slept. To the media, he was the symbol of modern success. But to Alexander himself, life had become mechanical, a loop of meetings, flights, and sterile hotel rooms. He had built everything from scratch, starting with a small startup that nearly bankrupted him before it made him rich. But with each new milestone, the emptiness grew louder. The price of power had been loneliness, and somewhere along the way, he had stopped believing in love or in family, or in the kind of connection his late mother used to talk about when he was a child. That morning, his assistant had scheduled an appointment for him at the same medical facility, Riverside. Not for anything serious, just a private fertility preservation procedure recommended by his physician. It was, in his words, a form of insurance. A logical step for a man who planned everything meticulously, including the future he might never share with anyone. He was unaware that a simple administrative mistake that day would set in motion a chain of events powerful enough to change 2 lives forever. When Alexander arrived, the contrast between his entrance and Emma's couldn't have been starker. While she waited in a noisy hallway, he entered through the underground garage reserved for VIPs. A private elevator carried him to the upper floor, where silence and luxury replaced chaos. The private clinic wing looked more like a boutique hotel than a hospital. Soft lighting, marble floors, and a receptionist who greeted him by name. He signed his forms quickly, not bothering to read every page. In his world, paperwork was routine, and this was just another task to be completed before his next meeting. Downstairs, Emma sat nervously in a small examination room. A nurse with kind eyes named Rita checked her vitals and smiled reassuringly. "Just a routine checkup, sweetheart. Probably just stress or low iron," she said. Emma smiled faintly, relieved. unaware of how far from routine her day was about to become. When Rita left, another technician entered, young, tired, distracted. Her name tag read Zoe Chin. She was covering a double shift because two of her coworkers had called in sick. Her mind was foggy, her hands trembling slightly as she sorted patient files and test samples. Zoe glanced at the computer screen, which lagged and froze before showing a name, A. Grant. She sighed and muttered, "Finally." The system had been glitching for days, mixing patient records. She didn't realize that the sample tray she carried wasn't for the VIP fertility storage upstairs, but for a completely different department. As Emma lay there, confused but trusting, Zoe performed the wrong procedure. The paperwork, mislabeled and scanned into the wrong file, would go unnoticed for weeks. When Emma left the clinic that day, she felt relieved. She believed she had just gone through a few standard tests. The nurse told her results would arrive by email in a few days. She even stopped at her favorite bakery on the way home, treating herself to a coffee and a muffin, promising herself she'd rest more. The world still looked normal. Sunlight on cars, children playing in the park, the steady rhythm of everyday life. But somewhere inside that hospital's database, her name had been linked, by pure accident, to Alexander Grant's genetic sample. 2 weeks later, the phone call came. It was the clinic, their tone urgent but controlled. "Miss Collins," the woman said, "we need you to come in immediately. There's been a situation regarding your test results." Emma's stomach dropped. She sat in silence, her heart racing, thinking she might have some terrible illness. She didn't know that the truth waiting for her was even stranger. At the same time, Alexander's assistant received a discreet message from the clinic, informing him that an irregularity had been detected in one of the recent procedures. He frowned, distractedly reading it between meetings. "Fix it," he told his secretary, assuming it was a billing issue. He didn't know that his signature on a consent form weeks earlier had just made him, by law, the genetic father of an unborn child. When Emma returned to Riverside Medical Center, her hands trembled as she filled out another set of papers. Dr. Hammond, a serious-looking man in his 50s, entered the room with a folder and an expression that blended discomfort with disbelief. "Miss Collins," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I want you to stay calm. There's been a medical error." Emma frowned, confusion clouding her features. He continued, "During your previous visit, there was a mix-up between patients in our database. A procedure meant for another client was mistakenly performed on you. You are currently pregnant." The world went silent. She stared at him, not breathing, not blinking. The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to grasp. "Pregnant?" she whispered. "But that's not possible." I didn't." Dr. Hammond lowered his gaze. "The donor material belonged to one of our VIP clients. His name is confidential, but please understand, he has a right to be informed as well." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. "You're saying—" "I'm pregnant with a stranger's child? Because of your mistake?" The doctor nodded solemnly. "We take full responsibility, and we will ensure your safety and privacy throughout this process." She left the clinic in a daze, walking aimlessly through the city as rain began to fall. People passed by her, umbrellas blooming like flowers, cars splashing water across the pavement. But Emma didn't notice any of it. She was too lost, too broken. Her dreams, her plans, everything she had built around control and purpose, had just been ripped away by an error she hadn't even known existed. That night, as she sat on her couch staring at nothing, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. When she answered, a deep, steady voice spoke on the other end. "Miss Collins," the man said, his tone composed yet strained. "This is Alexander Grant, I believe. We need to talk." The rain had stopped, but the world outside Emma's window looked like it was holding its breath. The city lights shimmered across puddles on the street, casting golden ripples that danced against the walls of her tiny apartment. Emma sat there, her phone pressed weakly to her ear, her heart racing as if her world had tilted into a reality she couldn't recognize. The voice on the other end was calm but firm, carrying the tone of a man used to being obeyed. Alexander Grant. His name alone carried weight, yet to Emma, it was just another name that meant trouble. She had heard it before. The billionaire investor who dominated headlines, the man whose company owned a dozen startups, the one people called the cold visionary. And now, by some absurd, impossible twist of fate, she was carrying his child. "Miss Collins," he said again, breaking the silence. "I was informed of what happened. I'd like to meet in person." His tone was measured, formal, but beneath it there was something else. Tension, maybe disbelief, maybe guilt. Emma swallowed hard, clutching the phone tighter. Her voice trembled when she replied, "I don't think there's anything to discuss. This isn't my fault and I don't want anything from you." "Regardless," Alexander replied, "we're both involved now. I'd rather we speak face to face than through lawyers or doctors. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. at the Grant Holdings building. My assistant will make the arrangements." He didn't wait for her response. The line clicked and he was gone. Emma dropped the phone and buried her face in her hands. The reality of it hit her again like a wave. Pregnant. With the child of a man she had never met. Her life, once ruled by plans and deadlines, had unraveled into chaos overnight. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to break completely. She told herself she would face him not as a victim, but as a woman demanding justice and truth. The next morning, the world seemed too bright, too polished, as she walked toward the towering glass building that bore his name. Grant Holdings. The lobby alone looked like another world. White marble floors, tall glass panels, people in tailored suits moving with purpose. Emma felt small, out of place, clutching her worn leather bag. A receptionist greeted her politely, but with that cautious tone reserved for people who didn't belong there. "Mr. Grant is expecting you. Please, this way." The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless. When the doors opened, the office stretched before her. Minimalistic, sleek, filled with sunlight and city views. And there he was. Alexander Grant stood by the window, tall and composed in a charcoal suit, his dark hair neatly styled, his sharp gray eyes fixed on her with curiosity and caution. He looked nothing like the headlines described. Colder, perhaps, but there was a certain gravity about him. The kind of man who made decisions that changed other people's lives without flinching. "Miss Collins," he said as he turned to face her, "thank you for coming." His voice was smooth, deep, steady, the kind that carried authority even when softened. Emma took a breath and stepped closer, every nerve screaming at her to run, yet her resolve holding her in place. "I didn't come here to thank you," she said, her tone firm. "Your clinic made a mistake. I was there for a checkup, not this. I don't even know how something like this could happen." Her voice cracked slightly at the end, but she didn't look away. Alexander studied her carefully, his jaw tightening. "I've reviewed the situation," he replied. "The clinic confirmed a mix-up between files. It's unprecedented." "Unprecedented?" she repeated, disbelief lacing her tone. "That doesn't change the fact that I'm the one living with the consequences. My entire life just changed because someone couldn't check a name properly." For the first time, Alexander's composure wavered. He wasn't used to being confronted, not like this. His world was one of contracts and negotiations, not raw emotion. "Miss Collins," he began carefully, "I understand this is difficult, but you need to know I will take responsibility. Financially, medically, whatever you need, it will be taken care of." Emma's eyes flashed with anger. "You think this is about money?" she said, her voice rising. "I don't want your money, Mr. Grant. I want my life back." "But apparently that's not possible anymore, is it?" Silence filled the space. For a moment, the hum of the city below seemed louder than the air between them. Alexander's expression softened almost imperceptibly. He had expected outrage, yes, but not this quiet kind of strength, not this refusal to be bought. He walked around his desk and stood a few feet away from her, his voice lowering. "Then what do you want, Miss Collins?" Emma met his gaze without hesitation. "I want honesty. I want to know how this happened. And I want to decide what happens next. Without your lawyers, without your money, without anyone telling me what to do." Alexander nodded slowly. For the first time, he saw her not as a problem to be managed, but as a person, one who had been caught in the crossfire of his structured, calculated world. "You'll have that," he said quietly. "I promise you." Over the next hour they spoke, awkwardly at first, cautiously, two strangers trying to make sense of an impossible situation. Alexander explained how his doctor had arranged a fertility preservation procedure weeks ago, how everything had been handled by his private team, how such a mix-up seemed almost unthinkable. Emma listened, arms crossed, fighting the swirl of emotions inside her. She wanted to hate him, his calm, his control, his privilege. But part of her saw something else. A man who was just as shaken as she was, though he hid it behind polished words and steady eyes. When she finally stood to leave, Alexander said, "You shouldn't have to face this alone. Let me help, not as a transaction but as a human being." Emma hesitated, her hand on the door. "You can't help me fix what's already broken," she said softly. "But maybe you can help me make sure no one else goes through this again." And then she left, leaving him standing in his pristine office, surrounded by the silence of his own thoughts. That night, Alexander sat alone in his penthouse staring at the skyline. For years he had lived in perfect order. Every plan, every risk, every move calculated. But now, for the first time in a long while, he felt something that defied control. Responsibility that was more than financial, more than professional. It was personal. He couldn't stop thinking about Emma. The tremor in her voice when she said she didn't want his money. The fire in her eyes when she demanded the truth. Meanwhile, Emma lay awake in her apartment, one hand resting on her stomach. She didn't know what the future held, only that she was no longer the same woman she had been before that visit to the clinic. Something inside her, something beyond fear, what it was beginning to grow. Not just life, but resolve. Over the next few days, the clinic became a battlefield of investigations, legal reviews, and quiet settlements. The media didn't know, not yet. Both Alexander and Emma agreed to keep it confidential, though for very different reasons. She wanted privacy. He wanted control. Yet, as strange as it felt, they began to communicate. Short calls, practical conversations about medical updates and appointments. Slowly, a fragile connection began to form. Not romantic, not yet, but human. One evening, after another exhausting day at work, Emma received a message. "Check your email. I think you'll want to see this." It was from Alexander. She opened her laptop and found an attached document, an internal report from Riverside Medical Center. It detailed the series of errors that had led to the mix-up: faulty labeling, exhausted staff, a crashed computer system, and an unsigned approval form. She read it all, her anger turning into something more complicated. Sadness, empathy, even understanding. When she called him later, her voice was softer. "You didn't have to send me that." "I know," he said, "but you deserve to know the truth." Silence lingered between them, comfortable this time. Emma finally said, "I don't know how we fix this, but maybe we start by making sure no one else suffers because of someone's negligence." Alexander's answer came slowly, thoughtful. "Then we'll fix it together." In that moment, something shifted. The line between stranger and ally blurred, replaced by something neither could name, a reluctant partnership born from chaos, destined to change them both. And somewhere, quietly, life continued to grow. Inside Emma's heart, and within her womb, a fragile beginning to something that would soon test the limits of love, forgiveness, and the meaning of fate itself. The following weeks unfolded like a blur of questions, paperwork, and sleepless nights. Emma Collins tried to go about her life as if it were still her own, but each day she woke to a reality that reminded her nothing would ever be the same again. The nausea came and went. Her emotions danced between disbelief and quiet acceptance, and the faint swell of her belly was a constant whisper of the truth she couldn't ignore. She hadn't asked for this and hadn't planned it, hadn't dreamed of it, and yet, it was now a part of her, growing silently, shaping her days and her thoughts. At first, she avoided Alexander Grant's calls. She didn't want his pity, nor his money, nor his control. But Alexander was persistent, never rude, never invasive, simply constant in his quiet way. His messages were short and formal at first. "Just checking in on your test results. Let me know if the clinic sent over the new reports." But as days passed, his tone softened. "Are you getting enough rest? You shouldn't have to go through this alone." Emma didn't know what to make of it. She had expected arrogance, dominance, the coldness of a man too powerful to care. But what she found instead was something more complex. Restraint, guilt, and maybe, deep beneath it all, a sincere effort to make things right. Their next meeting took place at a quiet cafe, far from his corporate world. Alexander had suggested somewhere private, but Emma insisted on a public space. She needed air, not confinement. When she arrived, he was already there. dressed casually for the first time without the armor of his tailored suits. For a moment she hesitated, unsure how to greet the man whose child she carried yet whose life was a universe away from hers. He stood when he saw her. "Emma," he said, his voice softer than she remembered. "Thank you for coming," she nodded, sitting across from him. "You don't have to thank me."
I just don't want misunderstandings.
"Whatever this is, it needs boundaries." Alexander leaned back, studying her with quiet respect. "Boundaries," he repeated thoughtfully. "That's fair. You've been through something no one should ever experience. You deserve control over what happens next." For a long moment they simply talked. About practical things at first, doctor's appointments, legal rights, medical privacy. But as time passed, their conversation began to drift. She asked him about his company, his life, and he surprised her by answering honestly. He told her about growing up with a single mother who worked nights to keep food on the table, how he had built his empire from nothing but sheer will and a handful of failed ventures. "People think money fixes everything," he said quietly. "But it only hides the cracks. It doesn't fill them." Emma listened, her gaze softening. She had spent years believing men like him were untouchable, born into success, untethered by struggle. But here he was, human, layered, scarred in ways she hadn't expected. "Maybe the cracks are what make us real," she said softly. "If everything was perfect, maybe we'd forget what it means to feel." Something in him shifted at those words. He didn't say anything right away, but the silence between them grew warmer. No longer filled with tension, but with understanding. When she left that afternoon, Alexander watched her go, and for the first time in years, he didn't return to his office immediately. He stayed there in that cafe corner, realizing that the woman fate had thrown into his life wasn't a problem to be solved. She was a reminder of everything he had lost sight of while chasing perfection. Over the next month, their paths began to cross more frequently. He accompanied her to a few medical appointments, discreetly, always respectful of her independence. The doctors were careful around them, aware of who he was and what the situation meant. Yet every time he entered the room, Emma noticed how his expression softened when he looked at the sonograms, his usually sharp eyes gentling as if something sacred was unfolding before him. One afternoon, after a long appointment, Emma found herself standing beside him in the hospital corridor, both silent as they stared at the printout of the baby's scan. "That's him?" he asked quietly, as if the word itself carried a fragile weight. "Or her," Emma said, a small, uncertain smile on her lips. "The doctor said it's still early." Alexander nodded, then looked at her, not as a CEO, not as a man defending his reputation, but as a human being trying to understand the miracle standing before him. "It's strange," he murmured. "I've made millions of decisions in my life, and every one of them calculated, but this wasn't planned, and yet it feels like the first real thing in years." Emma didn't know what to say. There was something about the honesty in his tone that left her momentarily breathless. She wasn't falling for him, at least she told herself she wasn't, but she couldn't deny the quiet pull, the way his words lingered in her mind long after they parted ways. Outside the clinic, they shared a brief moment of laughter, the first between them, when Alexander accidentally opened the wrong car door and nearly set off the alarm. For a man so composed, seeing him flustered was oddly endearing. Emma laughed, the sound genuine, the kind of laughter she hadn't felt in weeks. He smiled too, and for that brief second the walls between their worlds cracked. But not everyone around them saw it that way. News of the clinic's private incident began to leak, whispers among staff, rumors in business circles. Alexander's board caught wind of something confidential involving him and a patient. His PR team urged him to take control of the story before it exploded. One of his partners even advised him to resolve it quietly, implying money or influence should make it disappear. But Alexander refused. He had built his empire on integrity, and though this situation was anything but ordinary, he couldn't bring himself to treat it like another business transaction. Meanwhile, Emma's personal life was unraveling. A few clients dropped her freelance projects after she started missing deadlines. Her landlord hinted at raising rent. Her mother, who lived 2 towns away, noticed her fatigue during their phone calls. "Are you sure you're all right, sweetheart?" she asked one evening. Emma wanted to tell her everything, but how could she? How could she explain that her life had turned into a story too unbelievable to be real? Still, through it all, she found strength she didn't know she had. She worked late into the night, designing brochures, editing posters, taking commissions online. She refused to let her circumstances define her. And slowly she began to see that maybe this child, this unexpected life wasn't just a burden, but a reason to grow stronger, wiser, braver. Alexander noticed that too. He began quietly supporting her without overstepping, connecting her to new clients, sending her high-profile design work from his company under anonymous contracts. When she finally discovered the truth, she confronted him about it, half angry, half touched. "You can't just fix everything with money, Alexander," she said, standing in his office one evening. He met her gaze evenly. "It's not about money. It's about belief. You have talent, Emma. I just wanted to make sure the world sees it." For a long moment, she didn't respond. Then unexpectedly, her anger melted into gratitude. "You're impossible," she murmured, shaking her head. "But thank you," he smiled faintly. "I've been called worse." That night, as she walked home, the city lights shimmered on wet pavement, and Emma realized how much she had changed. The fear that had once consumed her was giving way to a new kind of courage. Maybe fate hadn't been cruel. Maybe it had simply forced her to confront the parts of herself she had been too afraid to see. Back in his penthouse, Alexander stood by the window looking out at the city below. His reflection stared back, the same man the world admired, yet no longer the same inside. For years he had believed control was everything, but now he was learning that sometimes the most profound moments in life came from what we could never plan. And somewhere between those two lives, the woman who refused to be broken and the man who was learning to feel, again, a fragile bond began to take root, not built on romance or obligation, but on something deeper: understanding, compassion, and the shared knowledge that life's greatest miracles often begin in the middle of its biggest mistakes. The morning that changed everything began like any other. The city was half awake, painted in soft gold and blue, the kind of morning that promised calm before the inevitable storm. Emma Collins was sitting by her window, a cup of lukewarm tea forgotten on the sill, her laptop open with a half-finished design on the screen. She had started to enjoy these quiet hours, the small peace between dawn and the noise of the day. Her life had slowly begun to settle into a rhythm again, not normal but bearable. The nausea had lessened. The fatigue had turned into determination, and each time she felt the faint flutter inside her, she was reminded that despite everything, there was a reason to keep going. The clinic's mistake had thrown her into chaos, but somehow she had learned to breathe again inside it. She was learning that strength was not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward in spite of it. Then her phone buzzed. It wasn't the gentle chime of a friend's message or the clinic's reminder. It was the harsh, vibrating tone of a dozen notifications at once. Her heart sank before she even picked it up. The first message came from Lila, her best friend, written in all caps. "Emma, are you okay? It's all over the news." Another came from a client. "Is it true what they're saying?" Her hands trembled as she opened a link. The headline glared at her in bold black letters across a glossy media site. Tech billionaire Alexander Grant involved in secret medical scandal. Woman claims accidental pregnancy. Her stomach dropped. The article didn't mention her name, but the details were unmistakable. The timing, the description of the clinic, the fact that the woman involved was a freelance designer. It didn't take long for people to put the pieces together. Within hours, photos of her old design projects, her LinkedIn profile, even her social media posts were circulating online. By noon, her inbox was flooded with messages, and some sympathetic, most cruel. Strangers called her a liar, a gold digger, an opportunist. Others pitied her, calling her the accidental mother. Emma locked her phone and sat in silence, her pulse pounding in her ears. The world outside her window continued as if nothing had changed, yet her own world had shattered into noise and judgment. She didn't even realize she was crying until she tasted the salt on her lips. Miles away, in the sleek glass tower of Grant Holdings, Alexander stood in his office, surrounded by chaos of a different kind. His PR team had gathered in a flurry of panic, lawyers dialing phones, assistants whispering updates. The air was thick with tension. "We can still control the narrative," one of his managers said, voice sharp and desperate. "We'll release a statement denying personal involvement. Say it was a medical error unrelated to you directly." Alexander's jaw clenched. He looked out over the skyline, his reflection fractured by the sunlight. For a man who had built his empire on precision, he suddenly felt powerless. That would be a lie, he said quietly. Sir, with all due respect, another advisor interjected, if we don't act fast, this could destroy your reputation. Investors are already calling. You can't let emotion dictate this decision. But emotion had already entered the picture. In the middle of the chaos, Alexander found himself thinking not of headlines or shareholders, but of Emma, of the fear that must be gripping her right now. He remembered her words weeks ago. I just want to live my life without being defined by your world. And now, because of him, she had been dragged into it. Without another word, he left the meeting. His advisors called after him, but he ignored them. The only thing that mattered was finding her before the world did more damage. When he arrived at Emma's apartment, the hallway was quiet except for the sound of distant traffic. He knocked once, then again, his heart heavy with guilt. When she opened the door, he barely recognized her. Her eyes were red, her face pale, and she looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of the world had pressed down on her all at once. Emma, he said softly. I'm so sorry. She stepped aside without speaking, letting him in. The room was dim, the curtains drawn, her phone face down on the table as if she couldn't bear to see another message. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy, filled with everything that didn't need words. Finally, Emma broke it. They know, Alexander. The whole world knows, and they're not just talking about you. They're talking about me, my family, my work. Everything. Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to keep speaking. I didn't ask for this. I didn't want fame or money or anything. I just wanted to live quietly. But now I can't even step outside without feeling like everyone's staring at me. Alexander moved closer, his expression tight with remorse. I'll fix it, he said quietly. I don't know how yet, but I will. Emma shook her head, her hands trembling. You can't fix this, Alexander. You can't buy silence or erase what's already out there. This isn't just a business problem for you to solve. This is my life. He nodded slowly, the truth of her words cutting deep. You're right, he said. But I can stand beside you. I can make sure you don't go through this alone. She looked up at him, then really looked at him, the man whose name had turned her life upside down. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the guilt, the quiet determination that hadn't been there before, and for the first time she believed him. Then prove it, she whispered. Not with words, with actions. That night, Alexander made a choice that stunned everyone around him. The next morning, every major network, every digital feed, every financial paper carried his statement. Not a denial, not a deflection, but the truth. Standing in front of a wall of cameras, he faced the press with calm resolve. An error occurred at Riverside Medical Center, he said, his voice clear, steady. It resulted in a pregnancy involving me and Miss Emma Collins. She is innocent in this. The mistake was medical, not intentional. I take full responsibility for ensuring her privacy and safety moving forward. I will not allow anyone to vilify her for something beyond her control. Reporters shouted questions, flashes lit the air, but Alexander ignored them all. His words echoed across the country within minutes. Some called him reckless for admitting it. Others called him brave. But for Emma, watching from her small apartment, tears blurred her vision as she heard him say her name with respect, not shame. In that moment, she realized that he had done exactly what she had asked. He had acted. The storm didn't disappear overnight, but something remarkable happened in the days that followed. The public conversation shifted. Instead of scandal, people began talking about accountability, about medical negligence, about how systems often failed those without power. Interviews with ethicists filled the airwaves, and slowly, the narrative began to change. Alexander, true to his word, worked quietly behind the scenes to create something meaningful out of the chaos. He established a foundation to support victims of medical malpractice, funding legal aid and healthcare access for those who couldn't afford it. He asked Emma to help lead the design and messaging for the project. At first she hesitated, but he insisted, saying she was the heart of the story, the one who had shown courage when he had only seen damage control. Working together brought them closer, though neither dared to call it that. Their partnership became a kind of quiet healing for both of them. Emma found purpose again, designing campaigns that spoke of resilience, forgiveness, and second chances. Alexander found peace in something he couldn't quantify or measure, the simple act of doing the right thing without expecting anything in return. One evening, after a long day at the foundation office, they stood on the terrace overlooking the city. The air was warm and the skyline shimmered like a promise waiting to be kept. Emma rested her hands on the railing, feeling the faint kick beneath her ribs, a reminder that life, for all its chaos, continued to move forward. Alexander stood beside her, silent but steady. "You didn't have to do all this," she said softly, not looking at him. "Yes, I did," he replied, "because I was part of what hurt you. But maybe now we're both part of something that helps others." She turned to look at him, her eyes meeting his. There was gratitude there, and something unspoken. Not love yet, not romance, but the deep trust that comes from surviving something extraordinary together. For the first time in months, Emma smiled without pain. "Maybe," she said, "this was never just a mistake. Maybe it was a beginning." Alexander's lips curved slightly. "Then let's make sure it becomes one worth remembering." As the city lights glowed beneath them, they stood side by side, two people bound not by circumstance but by choice, by growth, by the quiet understanding that life doesn't always give you what you want, but sometimes it gives you exactly what you need to change everything. The months that followed unfolded like the slow turn of a healing season, each day carrying its own weight of memory and hope. The noise that had once swallowed Emma Collins's world began to fade, replaced by something quieter, something real. The media had moved on to new stories. The city had resumed its endless rhythm, and she was no longer a headline or a symbol. She was simply herself again, though not the same woman she had been before. Pregnancy had changed her body, but the experience had changed her soul. She had discovered layers of strength she hadn't known existed, a resilience born not of anger but of acceptance. She had learned how to stand tall even when her knees shook, how to find peace in uncertainty, and how to forgive the world for its chaos. Her days had settled into a rhythm that, while far from ordinary, carried the comfort of purpose. She worked part-time for the foundation she had helped Alexander create, a place where her story had become the seed for change. The foundation's mission to support victims of medical negligence had grown beyond their expectations. Emma had designed its emblem herself, a broken circle that rejoined into a new shape, symbolizing life rebuilt after loss. She had poured her emotions into every line and color, and when the logo was unveiled, people across the country shared it as a mark of hope. She had gone from being an accidental patient to a voice of empowerment. And though she still carried scars from what had happened, she no longer hid them. Alexander Grant's transformation was quieter but no less profound. The man once known for cold precision had learned, through Emma's quiet defiance, that power meant little without empathy. He still ran his empire with discipline and focus, but his priorities had shifted. He spent less time chasing boardroom battles and more time building something lasting. Not just wealth, but purpose. His board had been skeptical at first when he redirected a portion of company profits toward the foundation, but results silenced criticism. Public opinion had swung in his favor, portraying him not as a scandal-ridden executive, but as a man who turned a personal tragedy into a mission for good. Yet beneath the professional triumph, what mattered most to him was far simpler. The evenings spent with Emma discussing new projects, the shared laughter over takeout boxes and late-night brainstorming, the moments when her guard would drop and her real self, warm, stubborn, fiercely kind, and would shine through. Still, beneath the surface of their growing closeness lingered unspoken questions. Emma often wondered where they truly stood, not as co-founders, not as reluctant partners in an accident, but as two people bound by something deeper. Alexander never pressured her. He respected her independence, always careful not to cross lines. But there were moments when his gaze lingered longer than it should, moments when the distance between them felt fragile, like something both of them were afraid to break. It wasn't romance in the cinematic sense. It was quieter, steadier, a connection built on trust rather than fantasy. And yet, in the quiet corners of her mind, Emma sometimes imagined what life might be like if they allowed that connection to become something more. As winter turned to spring, the days grew warmer, and with each passing week, Emma felt the life within her grow stronger. Her doctor's visits became more frequent and Alexander never missed one. He always arrived early, his schedule cleared without hesitation, sitting quietly beside her as the doctor spoke in soft tones. The first time he heard the baby's heartbeat, his expression changed completely. A flicker of disbelief followed by something almost reverent. Later, as they walked out of the clinic, he said, "It's strange. I've closed deals worth billions, but nothing I've built has ever sounded that alive." Emma had smiled at that, her eyes softening, and for a brief moment, the world felt suspended between laughter and tears. Then, on a rainy night in late May, everything shifted again. Emma woke with sharp pain low in her abdomen, followed by a rush of panic as she realized what was happening. The contractions came fast, too fast. She fumbled for her phone, calling Alexander without thinking. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy but instantly alert. Within minutes, he was at her door, rain-soaked and breathless, his usual composure replaced by raw urgency. He helped her to the car, his hands steady even when hers weren't. His calm voice the only anchor she could hold on to. "Breathe, Emma," he said softly. "You're not alone. I'm right here." At the hospital, time blurred into flashes of light and sound. Nurses rushing, machines beeping, voices echoing. Emma gripped his hand as another wave of pain tore through her, and for the first time she didn't try to be strong. She cried openly, trembling, exhausted, and Alexander held her hand tighter, whispering words he didn't even know he had in him. Hours passed before the cries of a newborn filled the air. The doctor smiled through the exhaustion. "Congratulations," he said gently. "You have a healthy baby boy." The world went still. Emma felt tears spill freely as they placed the tiny bundle in her arms. The baby's skin was warm, his small fingers curling around hers as if he already knew her. Alexander stood beside her, silent, his throat tight, his eyes fixed on the fragile life that had come from an accident but now felt like destiny. When the baby's eyes opened for the first time, a deep hazel, somewhere between her brown and his gray, Alexander felt something inside him break and rebuild all at once. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of life changed again. Emma recovered slowly, surrounded by warmth she hadn't expected, not only from Alexander but from the growing circle of people their story had touched. The foundation sent flowers, volunteers sent cards, strangers online sent messages of support. But what mattered most were the quiet moments. The mornings when she sat in the rocking chair, cradling her son while sunlight streamed through the curtains, or the evenings when Alexander visited, bringing groceries, paperwork, and sometimes just silence. He never overstepped, never tried to claim a role she didn't offer, but he was there, always. When her son, whom she named Ethan, first laughed, Alexander was there. When she panicked about being a single mother, he reminded her, "You're not alone in this. We may not have planned it, but we'll make sure he grows up knowing he was wanted." And Emma believed him, because she had seen the way he looked at Ethan, not with obligation, but with wonder. Months passed, and their partnership deepened into something that defied definition. They were not lovers, not quite family, not yet something they could name. But there was peace in their bond, and maybe that was enough, for now. They spent long evenings on the terrace of the foundation building, watching the sunset melt into the horizon while Ethan slept nearby in a stroller. They talked about life, about fate, about how sometimes the worst moments could lead to the most extraordinary outcomes. One evening, Emma turned to him and said, "Do you ever think about how different things could have been if that mistake hadn't happened?" Alexander looked at her for a long moment before replying, "I used to, but not anymore, because without it I never would have met you, or him, and for the first time I feel like my life finally means something beyond success." Her eyes softened, and for a moment the unspoken connection between them glowed quietly in the fading light. "You've changed, Alexander," she said gently. "You're not the man I read about in magazines anymore." He smiled faintly. "That man was good at building walls. You taught me how to build something else." There was silence then, filled with the weight of everything they had endured. She reached out, her hand brushing his in a small gesture, yet it felt like the beginning of something vast. Not a perfect ending, not a fairy tale, but something real. Two broken lives finding strength in each other's light. As night settled over the city, Emma looked down at her son, asleep and peaceful, and then back at Alexander. "Do you think he'll ever understand how strange and beautiful his story is?" she asked softly. Alexander smiled. One day when he's old enough, we'll tell him. And maybe he'll understand that sometimes life doesn't go wrong. It just takes the long way around to bring you where you belong. Emma nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes. She didn't know what the future held, whether their paths would remain intertwined, whether love would one day bloom from the friendship they had built. But she did know this. She was no longer afraid. The mistake that had once shattered her world had instead rewritten it, not into the life she had planned, but into one that was fuller, deeper, and far more meaningful than she could have ever imagined. And as she sat there with her son in her arms, Alexander by her side, and the quiet hum of the city below, she realized that sometimes the greatest miracles don't arrive with warning. They arrive through chaos, through pain, through the unexpected detours that force us to discover who we truly are. Emma smiled softly, whispering to herself, maybe this was never a mistake at all.